Welcome back to another video. I'm standing here with Brandon, the man, the myth, the legend. He is the second largest Turo operator in the nation.
Yeah.
You now have over 200 cars, and I actually did an interview with Brandon about 7 months ago. You had 150 cars at the time.
Yeah.
And recently you've done a lot of co-hosting, right?
Yes.
And I want to do a quick video for everybody talking about co-hosting on Turo.
Okay.
So talk to me a little bit about co-hosting. You know, why would somebody want to co-host?
Okay.
What does it look like?
Yeah.
Like, what, you know, who's it for, right?
Yeah, so essentially co-hosting is when you find somebody else who has a vehicle and you're managing that vehicle for them. So it's not a vehicle that you own, lease, or bought in cash. It's just some friend, family member, acquaintance, or somebody who wants to make some money on Turo that will send you a car and you'll manage for them. Now there's plus and minuses to both. If you're anything like me, you'll eventually get to a point within your Turo career where you'll go, I'm handcuffed. I no longer have any more cash to buy cars. I don't have any more space on my credit to buy cars. They laugh at me when I go to the dealership. And I just can't lease a car. And so now the only way for me to get inventory is to acquire a co-host. Now, I looked at this from a different angle than most people look at. Most people just go, okay, well, I gotta find co-hosts. Well, I'm looking at the root of the problem and going, okay, well, what would incentivize somebody to want to co-host a car? Mm-hmm. Here's the truth. I've already done all the research for you guys. This is what you're gonna find out. When you're co-hosting for people, the only way for me to make money is for you to typically lose money. Mm-hmm. Or for you to make money, I would have to lose money. And so we have to find different alternatives. If this were different, I would have 5,000 cars right now.
Sure.
If I could just say, hey, Austin, go to the dealership and buy 20 cars,
yeah,
we're both gonna make money. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. So the only ethical way that you can really get vehicles is to get people to understand a couple of things. One, maybe you have a car that you no longer use, mm-hmm, that you don't wanna sell because you're either gonna take a hair clip for it, or you may wanna use it later. Turo co-hosting is a great option for you. Or two, maybe you get really high income on your taxes and you want to have some depreciation to shelter some of that income. So I've figured out ways to actually acquire co-hosts knowing that these two things can play in, right? I'll give you one example, right? And I've got in my course a bunch of ways to acquire co-hosts, but here's one example. Have you ever gone to a dealership and you sat down and you're looking at the numbers and they go, yeah, so your $20,000 car, we can give you $10,000 in a trade, and but we're going to give you a good deal on this new car, so it's going to make up for it, right? And you're like, what? I'm going to take half of a hair clip on my car, and a lot of times that will ruin a deal.
It will.
So I have got a lot of my cars co-hosted from salespeople in the industry, where I just say, hey, look, I don't want you to ruin this deal. I still want you to get the deal. Just tell them they can send the car to me.
Yeah.
I'll help them make money on this vehicle, and now you can get your car. You don't have to worry about the trade-in piece of it. So they get a deal, and then I get a co-hosted car. So that's just one way, if you think about the positives, that you can massage your way into grabbing a co-host.
Sure. Yeah. And with co-hosting, you know, I would imagine, right, the type of person that would want to get involved in co-hosting might be somebody who they're watching right now, right? They see what you've built, you know, they watch maybe our other video, and they want to get into Turo. But maybe they don't have the credit, they don't have the cash, like they can't really afford to go get into Turo, right? And so they're taking your advice, they're like, hey, I'll go find the people you're talking about. I'll talk to the sales guy, I'll talk to the baseball player who makes a bunch of money, who needs the depreciation. I'll just go get somebody that has the car, and I'll make, you know, 30% or 70, because you 30-70, right, with co-hosting? 70 to the owner of the car.
Correct.
30 to you.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. And then they build the infrastructure, right? So they have to go then, what all infrastructure would they have to build? I'd imagine if they're just getting started, they do everything themselves, right, in the beginning.
Yeah, so one nice thing when you're first starting is I've seen people manage up to 30 cars by themselves.
Okay.
And you're managing customers, you're cleaning vehicles, you're just doing all the prep work involved. And then it becomes really lucrative for you, right? Because all that money goes into your pocket for the time that you're investing.
Sure.
And then once you grow past that, now you're gonna have to start to hire somebody, teach them, you know, what you've done, and then now you gotta look at it differently to figure out, okay, it's costing me now this much per car in actual money, not just time, but actual money. Am I still making money if I'm making this much on a co-hosted side?
Yep.
So it's just a different angle that you gotta do, but me and you, we're big scalers. Like we like to think of, okay, if there's $10 to be made there, I'm not worried about making the $10 there.
Sure.
I'm thinking about how can I pour some gasoline on that to make that $10 happen 100 times a day. And so for people who are wanting to scale a Turo business, co-hosting is really your way to do it, because there's not going to be a lot of access for us to get millions of dollars worth of cars. You know, I have close to $10 million worth of cars in our fleet. And I have just had the strategy of, if I can acquire a car, I'm acquiring a car. And so I've snatched them as many which ways as I can, but I'm at a point right now where even myself, I got a co-host. And so you're gonna have to go down this path one way or another. And when you go down that path, you're gonna have to find a strategy. But co-hosting is what's gonna really start booming Turo as a whole.
So we're standing out here in your shop, and you got quite a few cars out here.
Yeah, it's midweek, so we're gonna have a lot of our cars here, and especially the higher end exotic cars, because of the lower utilization rate, because of the cost of them. But yeah, it's a fun warehouse to be in today. You picked a good day to come.
Yeah, you can't tour a Turo operation on like a Friday or Saturday, right? All the cars would be out.
If you were here in a couple of days, this place would be empty. And we would be talking about nothing.
For sure. Well, let's walk around a little bit. I want to talk to you. Obviously, we did a conversation, about 7 months ago, right?
Yeah.
And at the time, you had 150 cars. Now you're at 200. You've got a lot more co-host stuff. You recently did kind of like a merger. Talk to me a little bit about that.
There's really two big stages with Turo. The first one is just managing a fleet by yourself. And you could do anywhere from 5 to, I know people doing 30, probably that's the max, like 30 cars, and that's just gonna depend on type of cars that you've got and location. And then you're gonna get to a point to where you're like, okay, do I wanna just live in the weeds here and go through this, or do I wanna kind of turn this into an actual business? And there's so few people that have turned this into an actual business, mostly because there's just really not any education out there on how to do it. It's kind of like, Turo doesn't say, here's a playbook. It's not a franchise. We're kind of left to our own devices to figure out ways to overcome problems. And then of course, you know how it is, because you have built and scaled many companies. As you scale things, systems break, people leave, people aren't good fits for your culture, and then you have to fill in the gaps and change things. So right now, we're going through that stage of pushing the bubble and letting it burst a little bit, fixing processes and procedures, and then building it back up. But really our ultimate goal is to build a large scale fleet that can be in direct competition with Hertz, Budget, all these guys, to be a big sustainable business on Turo.
I hope you're enjoying the business tour so far. Really quick, if you wouldn't mind, if you know of a business that you think would be a really cool tour, or if you own a business that you would like to get featured, all you have to do is text 480-418-5339, the word business, okay? Again, 480-418-5339, the word business, and we'll see if you qualify or if the business qualifies for us to go ahead and tour it. Now let's just go ahead and get back to the tour. You actually started bringing on co-hosts, right?
Yeah.
Meaning and one of them's actually me.
Yeah, yeah.
So I gave you my truck, and you're renting it out, right? How many cars are you co-hosting now?
We have about 30 cars off the top of my head that we're co-hosting. And granted, when we met last time, I don't think I had, maybe 10.
Yeah.
So that's something that we're just opening up.
You already had 150 cars that you owned, right? So why go that route?
Well, for our particular purposes, we had already built out this facility to accommodate more cars, and every Turo host is going to come across the same scenario. They eventually get to the point to where they can't financially acquire more cars themselves. And so if they want to keep growing, they're going to have to jump into the co-host space and figure out how to make that work. Now, what you want to keep in mind when you're doing that is a lot of people, most people who are doing Turo don't have a facility, they don't have employees, they've just got a couple of cars, they're making it their own business. That's the first stage of Turo. When you hop into the second stage of Turo, you're going to start to acquire a lot more bills, like overhead for a lease, for lights, for internet, employees, things keeping them going. And then you're gonna have to make sure that you have an accurate P&L that will show you at the end of the month. Each car now costs an extra 200 bucks with labor costs and overhead costs. And so if I'm gonna co-host, I need to make sure that if that number is 200, I'm charging more than 200 so that I'm making money, or at least 200 to sustain my bills. So I juggled along with this question a long time, and I know a lot of you guys are probably gonna juggle this too. That's the answer for it. So I've set up my P&L, let's just say for round purposes, my employee costs are $10,000 a month, and I have 100 cars, right? So I can very easily divide that number and figure out it costs X amount per car to have an employee run this car for the entire month. And I do the same with overhead. So I have those two categories blended together to know every single month what that number is going to be.
What were the pros and cons when looking at bringing on a co-host, right? Like, what were the risks associated with that? Like, when it comes to insurance, and somebody else has maybe a loan on their vehicle, they're giving you their car, but maybe the loan's in their name. Like, was there any sort of things that you had to work through when making the decision to bring on co-hosts?
Yeah, so you got to have the insurance piece figured out. Most of them will keep their own insurance, but we have a policy that will allow it to be under their name, and we can still insure it. It's just basically covering the gaps for when it's not out on a trip, when it's here, or if we're picking it up from the airport. So yeah, you want to look at that. There's so many different, we could do a 5-hour deep dive class into co-hosting. But if you're thinking about doing Turo, it's definitely something that needs to be on your radar, because it's going to give you the ability to acquire more cars. But you also want to make sure you do your research, because there's some cars that don't make sense. Like, you guys know I'm into Fiat 500s. I've got like 60 of these dang things right now. But if somebody were to bring me a Fiat 500, they only bring in $500 to $1,200 a month.
Right.
30% of that is like not going to cover my overhead per employee. So that right away disqualifies that from even making sense.
Yeah, well, and you don't need another Fiat, right? I mean, you could just go buy one on your own.
Yeah.
So you kind of just answered my next question, but what is your split for bringing on a co-host? What do you make? What do they make?
So we do a very simple process. We do 30% or $400, whichever one is higher.
Okay. And is that off the gross or off the net? How does that number break down?
It's off of gross income from Turo each month.
Okay, got it.
And so we have a Google Drive file for every individual co-host, and we just map out all that stuff for them.
Oh, very cool.
One thing that makes it really, really easy, and something that you guys need to think about as you guys grow your Turo fleet, if it's something that you're going to do, is you can no longer operate on one P&L. Each one of these assets out here and in this garage and on the side of the warehouse is its own unique business, right? And we need to know, is that car making money? Is that car losing money? So I run a P&L for every single car.
Got it.
You have to do that for co-hosting, because you obviously need to acquire each bill to that car and need to acquire each positive income from each trip to that car, so that at the end of the month I can search by class and see exactly how much that is making or losing. And if it's co-host, I pass it on to them. If it's us, then we look and see if that's a good car to keep.
Being the second largest Turo operator in the nation, you obviously chose the 90-10 plan. For somebody just getting started, would you recommend going to a lower plan?
That's a good question too, because you need to make sure that you can sustain an accident if you're on the 90-10 plan, because it increases your deductible to $2,500. So if you don't have $2,500 saved up, you're not going to be able to pay for the claim to fix the car. So that's a really important piece, and I'm glad you brought that up, that you need to think about. If it's not something that you have saved up, then you could put yourself in a pinch later if something were to happen.
Yeah, so if you have like one car, 2 cars, you don't have a lot of money in the bank, it might make more sense to work your way up to the 90-10.
Yeah. So depending on your market, alcohol consumption, high-end sports cars, $2,500 in the bank, those are probably the 3 main things that I would think about when choosing a plan. But for most of us, you're going to want to go with the 90 plan to maximize your income potential. And the other unique thing that co-hosting does is it gives me the ability to look at optics on a car without being financially vested in it. So I had a professional baseball player bring me a brand new 911, and he's like, hey, how do you think it's going to do on Turo? And even with all my experience with Turo, I was like, I don't know. Like, that car is 150 grand, and I just don't know if the numbers are going to line up to where you're going to make money. But I said, obviously, I'm going to do my best to do it. And this car is never here.
Really?
$300 a day.
Printing
it's
cash.
Gone. He's crushing it.
Wow.
So it gives me the ability to say, okay, well, I didn't think that car works. It actually does work. Maybe now I'm going to buy a couple more cars to add to the fleet to throw into the market.
Is the 911 the number one co-hosted car that you have right now?
It actually is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
What's the second one?
The second one is probably going to be the Maserati.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a couple of Maseratis.
Which one? Which model?
It's this black one right here. It's
Oh,
a Gran Turismo MC.
Really?
And it's the newer model that has the Apple CarPlay and the touchscreen. Yeah, they really upgraded them over a period of time.
Very, very cool. All right, number one piece of advice for somebody looking to get into Turo, regardless of how they're looking to get into it, what would you say?
Like anything, like me and you are both big on education, right? So if you're gonna do something, instead of touching the stove yourself, why don't you learn about other people who have touched the stove? So there's a lot of people in the Turo space, just like you within the real estate space. Like, invest some time and invest some money in buying some courses so that you can really go at it from the right angle. And I'll tell you why it's really important, especially with real estate too. Like, dude, when you buy a house, you're married. You can't exactly go back to the bank a couple months later and go, can you take this back? I don't think so. You can, same with cars, right? So invest the time and the energy and the money now into getting courses to educate yourself so that you're making good decisions from the beginning instead of catching up for bad decisions that you made at the beginning.
Phenomenal advice. Brandon, if somebody wants to co-host with you, how do they get a hold of you?
So we have a very simple link. Our website is You Can Rent Me, all spelled out, youcanrentme.com/co-hosting. Or you just go on our website and check out all the great stuff that we're going. We got education classes, mastermind groups you can get into. And of course you can rent a car when you're here in Arizona.
There you go. And I'll link all that down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.